Hello, my name is Ariel Velasquez. I'm in the Masters of IT program at Grand Canyon University. My presentation is called Application of Security Principles. I look into remote work security failures and design principles recommendations for remote work. My presentation is divided into 5 sections. Those are remote work backstory, describe 8 security failures in remote work, relate the security failures to the principles of cybersecurity, explain specific design principles that have been violated, um, and recommend design principles needed for remote work. Section 1, Remote Work Backstory. On this slide, I wanted to discuss the need for immediate remote workers. This is obviously in response to COVID-19. This slide shows a 1-year timeline from when COVID-19 first entered the U.S. Notice that around the March and April months, the world basically shuts down. This was the beginning of the work from home policies that businesses started to implement. Um, so we have the world shuts down, countries start sealing borders, sports teams start canceling seasons, or start canceling their seasons, schools start to close, employees go home, people start wearing masks, and they start social distancing. In this slide, we can see the dates that each state started locking its residents down. Um, we start with California because that's where the first case was found. And within a few weeks, most of the states have mandated stay-at-home orders. In this timeline, we can see from the very beginning of when the cases started all the way until current. And currently, a lot of companies are still working from home. My company in particular, they're deciding we may go to a permanent work from home solution. Section 2 describe 8 security failures in remote work. The first 4 are failing to physically secure your hardware, working where others can view your screen, openly discussing company or customer data while on video calls or cell calls. While screen sharing, employees may be entering or displaying login credentials or other sensitive data where other participants can see. I believe there's a lack of understanding on how you should protect sensitive information while working remotely. This leads to more of the security failures that I described. Employees printing sensitive data on home or shared printers, as well as leaving written data openly in their work area. So leaving or forgetting to pick up their printed documents or leaving papers around where others can view them or pick them up and walk away with them. And we have insecure Wi-Fi connections at home or in public. Insecure Wi-Fi can lead to increased chances of getting hacked, transferring. We have next unauthorized participants in video calls, also known as Zoom bombing. And then finally on this list, we have transferring of data between personal devices. So the transferring data between devices leaves vulnerabilities for data to be intercepted while in transit, especially between personal devices. Personal devices also may have malware or other malicious software installed. Also, there's an increase of phishing attempts or social engineering attempts. And I wanted to highlight a vulnerability that was detected. It's CVE-2021-36958. It's a remote code execution vulnerability in Windows Print Spooler software, which manages a device's printing jobs. That occurs when the software improperly performs privileged file operations, according to Microsoft's page that is dedicated to the vulnerability. In this vulnerability, the printer would need to be readily available for someone to insert a flash drive so they can insert the code and insert the malware. Section 3, relate the security failures to the principles of cybersecurity. This is the CIA triad. It stands for confidentiality, integrity, availability. For confidentiality, we have protection from unauthorized access, protection from unauthorized use, and protection from disclosure. as well as protect data residing on systems, protect data in transit, and protect data in process. And integrity stands for it detects alteration that has occurred in data that is in storage, data that is in transit, and data that is in process. Finally, availability. This control ensures that only authorized individuals have access, that there's acceptable level of performance, fault tolerance, redundancy, reliable backups, and controls that ensure prevention of data loss or destruction. And this CIA triad is an information security model used by organizations in efforts to keep their data secure. In my display of CIA triad, the vulnerabilities and violations weigh heavily on the confidentiality portion of the triad. And I had one item that was part of the integrity portion of the triad, and nothing in the availability for the list of violations that I've outlined. Again, those violations are failing to physically secure hardware, working where others can view your screen, openly discussing company or customer data while on video calls or cell calls. While sharing screen sharing, you display login credentials or sensitive data to other participants. You're printing data on shared printers, leaving the data in the open. You have insecure Wi-Fi connections, Zoom bombings. Those all are part of the confidentiality portion of the triad. And then for integrity, I have transferring data between personal devices. Data in transit is vulnerable to alteration and modifications. Section 4 explains specific design principles that have been violated. And I have usability. With remote work, there will be new tools like VPN and video conferencing applications that users will not be familiar with. Usability will go down with each new application that is introduced. Some users will need the additional one-on-one training. Next, we have economy of mechanism, also known as simplicity of design. With new applications, each new application that is installed, the design becomes more complicated and new vulnerability points are introduced. Trust relationships. This is due to increasing the trust zone. More devices will be in play, including personal routers and modems from which remote workers will be connecting from, including bring your own devices. Finally, we have least common mechanism. This states that sharing resources should be kept at a minimum. With remote work, these resources will now be shared with devices that are outside of the existing network. Finally, we have recommend design principles needed for remote work. Least privilege. Recommendation number 1, least privilege. If there was ever a time to do an audit of permissions and access rights, this would be the time to do it. Least privilege, as stated by our text, users and components should not have more access rights than necessary to carry out their tasks. With the increase in the number of remote workers, the chances that someone's credentials could be stolen greatly increases, and the least amount of data users have access to, the better. Recommendation number 2, your company may want to change their trust model to a deny by default strategy, also called a zero trust model. This does not pull in any trusted domains that the user has authenticated with. This requires authentication at every layer of security across all domains. Recommendation number 3, defense in depth. Since there is no application that is 100% able to stop all threats, you should add multiple mechanisms that specialize in preventing, detecting, isolating, and removing certain attacks. This could be data monitoring apps that detect abnormal data communications, to packet sniffers, to encryption tools, to intrusion detection systems. The list goes on and on. And final recommendation, cybersecurity training. So although this is not necessarily a security design principle, now is a great time to have your employees take their mandatory cybersecurity training, perhaps update the training to include being self-aware of their surroundings, video call etiquette, and proper data handling policies. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you. This has been a look into remote work, security failures, and design principles, recommendations for remote work. My name was Ariel Velasquez. Thank you.